Adrienne Hill is a retired high school mathematics teacher who has volunteered to educate teachers, students, and community members about Tourette syndrome and their comorbid disorders. Since 2005, Adrienne serves as a board member and educational consultant for the Tourette OCD Alberta Network. Her own journey as a mother of three children includes two who have been diagnosed with TS+, which are, of course, Tourette syndrome diseases. In addition to her role with the network, Adrienne is an active board member for Suzanne Gerbich's nonprofit About Time project. She is also a contributor to the field of skepticism as a Guerrilla Skepticism on Wikipedia editor and a regular reporter for the Skeptic Zone podcast. She has written articles for The Skeptic, which is based in Australia, and Skeptical Inquirer magazines.
So the thing that's not in the bio is Adrienne's recent contributions to the Skeptic Zone as Psychic Penny. So in the Hangout, we'll talk about that because it's got nothing to do with Tourette syndrome, but it's a really an interesting thing. It's a facetious skit that she has been doing for quite a while, and it's really fascinating. So I do want her to talk about that. And if I forget, you can bring it up, Adrienne. So
Okay.
welcome, Adrienne.
Thank you so much. So I guess I can share my presentation right away.
Yes, please.
All right. I'm really excited about doing this for RFR about a topic that's pretty near and dear to my heart. As was stated in the introduction, I have three children, two of whom have been diagnosed with TS+. My middle son could have had the diagnosis because he actually does fit the criteria, which we will discuss further on, but his symptoms are mild, so we never had to seek a diagnosis. So that's really important to understand that really it is a spectrum disorder. So I'm going to talk about my experience a little bit, and then I'm going to, even though it was done in the intro, I'll just go over it very, very briefly. What is Tourette syndrome? Then we're going to get into the history as well as the empathy exercise. Oh, and I almost forgot because this was not the order I was originally doing it. Can you guys see the results of the poll? Because I should talk a little bit about that because that's going to be embedded within my talk. So it doesn't look like a lot of people responded, probably because of the way I did it. That's my fault. So there are 6 responses. Have you ever met someone with Tourette syndrome? There were 4 people who said no and 2 who said yes. That's a pretty big percentage, actually. And for the next one, select all that could be a tick. You can see what people selected, and I'm going to discuss each of these within the PowerPoint, and so we'll go over them again, but I just wanted you to see the results very quickly. Then for the next one, what percent of people diagnosed have the swearing tick? One person thought 100%, and actually that's an interesting one because it's what I find most of the time. Most people think everybody who has Tourette syndrome swears, and that's not unusual.
It's certainly the characterization that
it is
in movies
by
and TV
media.
shows.
If you're talking about Oprah Winfrey, Dr. Phil, TikTok, if you look at the TikTok videos, anything in social media, it's almost always going to involve the swearing tick. So I'm not surprised to see that somebody, and there's more people than that think that. One person actually got it right, which is 7%, and we'll discuss that a little bit more.
Oh,
So it's
that's a lot lower than I would have guessed. I
Ex-
couldn't answer the poll, but I would have probably said the 68 or something.
Yeah, it's actually quite infrequent. In
Wow.
fact, none
That,
of
that,
my kids
that
ever
makes it
have
such
had.
an amazingly huge exaggeration by the media then.
It is. And we'll talk about it. I mean, my kids to date have not had the swearing tick, but it does not mean that they will not develop it at some point. And it's actually a range because of that, because the tics tend to change. The next one, which is the comorbid or the coexisting conditions, and the response, we'll talk about that. This is not unusual. Most people think it's related with autism. It's interesting. Somebody said stuttering, because stuttering can be actually be a tic. And then autism and ADHD. I've also seen, when I've done this poll before, anxiety as being a common thing. And we'll go into more detail with that when I'm doing my presentation. This one's interesting. When does it actually typically manifest? People actually got this one right. The majority of people, it is age 6 to 8. And this one here, that they stay the same over time. Yay, way to go. It is false. And if you get these wrong, don't beat yourself up, because most people don't know this stuff, right? This is why we're here today, is to learn about this. And they wax and wane. Yes, that is true. They come and go. And I love this, that everybody got this one right. So it can be all of the above. And we'll talk more about it again in my presentation. And the 1% for this one is correct. I just want to also make sure that you have a paper and pen ready at the end because we're going to do an empathy exercise. So I'm just warning you now to make sure you have pen and paper in hand. And it's really interesting, and people really seem to like it to sort of help understand what it's like to live with these disorders. So as Rob and Danielle said, I have been with Tourette Canada, or I was with Tourette Canada 2005 to 2018 as an in-service provider as well as a trainer. And from 2018 to the present, I am with the Tourette OCD Alberta Network, which is a nonprofit out of the University of Calgary. In my role there, I'm the treasurer. I'm also an in-service provider, educational consultant, etc. And I have kids with Tourette syndrome, as was said. And here's the webpage, just in case you want to learn more about anything I talk about. They have a lot of information. It's a great site. It's a great resource. People from around the world use it. So please just be aware of this before I get going. So what's the diagnostic process? What is Tourette syndrome? Well, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, you have to have a presence of more than one motor tic, so 2 or more motor tics, and I'll discuss those more later, and at least one vocal tic. Tics may wax and wane in frequency, as discussed in the quiz, but they must have persisted for more than a year, and the onset of symptoms have to happen before the age of 18, and the symptoms are not due to some other medical condition or substance, such as Parkinson's, Huntington's, brain trauma, medications, or substances. What is TS Plus? This is what my kids have, and we will discuss that later on as we go through this. So we already did the quiz. Here's the second question. The first question, how many people do you know with Tourette syndrome? Most people have not met or don't know that they've met people with Tourette syndrome. Whereas the second question is, what can be a tic? And believe it or not, all of these could be a tic. And I noticed that most people had like the eye rolling. I think that's pretty obvious. The punching their stomach, I was really impressed that people recognize that as a possible tic. And I'm going to just go on now to a
Can I
big,
can I can I
yeah,
ask you
yeah,
about
yeah,
the ba
yep,
specifically? Is it that
sure.
sound, or could it be
Yep.
repeated?
That actually, I have a friend whose name is Steve Call, and he had that tick. So he would say ba 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 ba, like in the middle of a sentence, or if he was just doing something, he'd be going ba 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 ba. So it was very quick, very sudden, and they could
So,
be nonsensical. I
so
have my oldest son as well had something called doidle, so that made up words can be a tick. And he would say that all the time, and usually in a high-pitched voice too, which I cannot replicate very
oh,
well.
well, so what I was getting at, it doesn't need.
Mhm.
It's not exclusively ba. It can be any repetitive
You
kind.
bet. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Select all that can be a tick, right? And so if you look at my next list, this is just a more extensive list. This is not even close to what can be a tick. Essentially, anything that is a movement or a vocal noise can become a tick. And I'm going to start off just talking about something like coughing, that kind of thing. When you get a cold, when you get a virus, a lot of people cough. That's one of the many symptoms. When the cold or the virus goes away, the coughing will continue if they have Tourette syndrome. Not always, but it can continue after the cold leaves. And the specialist that my kids saw said quite often his patients get misdiagnosed with asthma because of that. It's the same thing. The cough goes away, or the cold goes away, and the cough will remain for people with asthma. So it's really important to make sure the diagnosis is correct, because obviously, if you're coughing because of asthma, the treatment is very different than if you're coughing because you have a tick. In fact, if it's a tick, you might just leave it depending on the severity of the coughing. Now, the vomiting one. The only reason I have this one on here is my oldest son had this. It was horrifying. He was in high school. He ended up in the hospital with a very serious sort of respiratory virus that made him so congested that he would cough and then violently and then throw up. And he got better, but about once or twice or 3 times a day, he would cough and vomit still, even though he felt okay. So the doctor sent him through a whole bunch of tests. They made sure his gastro system was okay, his stomach, everything was all right. And they couldn't find anything. So I suddenly thought, well, I'm going to call the Tourette clinic his specialist, and they said, oh yeah, it could be a tick. And so that made us seek treatment because of course this is dangerous. And he did some exposure and response to stop this. Now it could have stopped just on its own. We don't know, but the treatment did seem did seem to actually help. And a few months later, he was no longer doing this. But that was probably the most frightening one that my kids displayed. Next one I want to talk about, saying what's for dinner tonight, only to your mother. That was also my oldest son. And it was very specific to me. Tics can be specific to a situation, they can be specific to a person. And this was his. He saw me, he automatically would say, what's for dinner tonight? Probably for 2 or 3 years. And you can see how it kind of makes sense. He wakes up, hey, Mom, what's for dinner tonight? Then after school, he sees me, Mom, what's for dinner tonight? During dinner, what's for dinner tonight? After dinner, what's for dinner tonight? You can see how it no longer makes sense.
Oh, so even after dinner.
Yeah, every time he saw me, if we walked out of a room, came back in, he would say, what's for dinner tonight? And the next one, rapping. And I don't mean, well, rapping a surface like that could be a tic, but I'm talking about rapping as in singing,
Oh, I was thinking that you actually meant rapping a table and it couldn't be singing.
Yeah, it could be either. And I actually had a student who had this, and I taught adult upgrade. So I often did not get any diagnoses until after they started struggling. And we would say, hey, have you had any accommodations in the past? And they would go, oh, yeah, I just didn't think I needed them anymore. And this was the case with one of my students who came in and one day just started rapping. And I'm thinking, okay, this is an unusual thing, but I just kind of ran with it and danced, and it ended and I carried on. And the next thing I knew, I got an email from the counselor, terrified, asking if anybody else had experienced this, and terrified that he had schizophrenia. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think it's schizophrenia. I can't diagnose, but I'm pretty sure this is like a tic, and that's in fact what it turned out to be. I also did an in-service for a kid who would sing opera in class. That was his tic. He'd start singing opera out of nowhere. But what's interesting is if it's okay for them to tic in the classroom, the anxiety goes down, the tics usually go down as well. So we're going to talk more about anxiety later on. It's one of the things that makes them worse.
So opera has been around for centuries. Rapping has
Yes.
been around for only decades, 4
Yes.
decades. So did people do this before there was actually official rapping?
No, no, no. I think it's just because of the culture, right? It's
Okay,
something
so
that's in the culture. Yeah.
But when you say opera, they're not actually like breaking out into Wagner. They're just going, right?
It could be, but no, this person was actually singing opera.
Oh,
It
I
was,
see. So they
yeah,
have an actual song in their head and they're just
yeah. And
got
it
it.
just blurts out. And it could just be, and it's quite often the same line over and over again. I'm just trying to remember. Steve had one, and it was an Elvis song, and it was like something about, oh, good grief. I can't remember the exact song, but he had one line that he sang over and over and over again on a whole car trip, drove his wife crazy. But
Wow.
yeah, so it can be just one line, it can be 2 lines, but it's usually fairly short. And in the
So
case of the kid rapping, it was very short.
so the touching people one, is that
Mhm.
a common thing?
Yes, and well, when I've been to Tourette conferences, yes, indeed, it was common. Especially it seemed like with school age kids, that was something that I saw them doing. And what was really weird too, they have an evening up thing that can happen. So one kid would touch another kid, and then they would have to touch the kid, or they'd have to touch themselves on the opposite shoulder. And that's getting a little bit into obsessive compulsiveness because there's an overlap between them. And sometimes it's hard to distinguish between what is a tic and what is an obsessive compulsive behavior. But yeah, no, it's the touching people can be one. And that's one that can be difficult because people don't understand and it's inappropriate. So it is one that you would try to work on. But if you're talking about a 5-year-old kid, we would recommend that people just kind of accept it, and he would work on trying not to do that and trying to find other ways of doing it. I've heard people saying things like, you cut out pictures of, say, famous people and they touch them instead of actual people.
Oh.
So there's ways of working around it, but it's complicated, if that makes sense. Okay, copying others' statements. Now, this did happen to me as a teacher, and I know about this stuff. I educated people and teachers about what Tourette syndrome looked like. And I was in a math class one year at the very beginning of the season of the term. And I'm like, okay, today we're going to work on quadratic equations.
we're going to work on quadratic equations, came a voice from somewhere in the class, and I couldn't see. And they kept imitating or repeating things throughout the classroom sporadically. And my initial thoughts was, this person is mocking me, and I've got to catch this person and get mad. And then I suddenly realized maybe it's not. Hey, hold on. Could it be that this person has a tic? And that's what it proved to be. And once they were comfortable in the class, that actually stopped. But it can seem very intentional. It can seem like they're trying to seek attention. And that's the last thing in the world that they really want to do. The other thing that people are often not aware of are there are hidden tics, such as breath holding, toe clenching, abdominal tensing. These are quite common. And my son, my oldest son, again, he used to come with me to talk and advocate because he had lived experience. So he knew about this particular tic because we always included it in our presentations. And he said to me one day, Mom, I've been holding my breath a lot. And I said to him, well, you do realize that's a possible tic? And he's like, oh, you're right. I'd totally forgotten. So I find it really interesting that if you're a person who's immersed in this, you still can miss things that are possible tics. You're not always aware of what's a tic and what's going on. Me as a parent, I was not aware until my son actually filled out a list of all his tics, of how many tics he had. And my kid who had tics was not recognizing that something that was going on that was distressing him was an actual tic. So they don't have to be really visible all the time. So let's look at the quiz and let's look at the answers again. Okay, so approximately what percent of people, I think we talked about this already, it is between 7 and 10%. And that is a huge misconception in society that Tourette syndrome has to include the swearing. Now, this woman here, she is not doing a swearing tic, obviously. She's making an obscene gesture. And that's actually called copopraxia. The swearing tic is called coprolalia. And even just under the postings that Rob made, the posting on Facebook, this is a while back, somebody immediately commented that maybe we'll get to see me swear. And I understand why people think that.
I think you said something like, you'll have to tune in to see.
Yes, exactly. I wanted them to come and learn, right? Because it's not their fault that that's the perception that's out there, because that's what is portrayed. It's portrayed in movies, it's portrayed, as I say, on TikToks and YouTube. It's Dr. Phil, it's on Oprah, it's everywhere. So I'm not blaming that person for making that comment, but I was hoping they would come. So I hope you're here if you are. So it's rare. And the other thing, like I said before, they come and they go. They don't stay with the same tic. It might last a couple years. It might last a couple months. We don't know. So my kids to this date have never had the swearing tic. It does not mean they won't have it at some point in their life. Let's hope they don't. So the two comorbid or coexisting conditions are obsessive compulsive disorder. And there's approximately 3% of US children that have just OCD on its own. So you can have OCD by itself, but you can also have it in combination with Tourette syndrome. And the comorbidity rate is about 38% of people diagnosed with Tourette syndrome will also have OCD. On the other hand, or however, around 90% of patients with Tourette syndrome will have what's called obsessive compulsive symptoms, which still can be quite debilitating. And that's what my kids actually were diagnosed with, was obsessive compulsive symptoms. And it was an anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety. So they had a whole potpourri of diagnoses. Now, the other one is ADHD. And that's about 60% of the cases. So it's a pretty high number. And up to 90% of patients seen in specialized patient clinics will have some kind of comorbidity. And of course, these are the two most common. And that's when it's called TS plus, is if you just have tics on their own, it's not that. But as soon as you start adding these other disorders, it's called TS plus, at least in Canada. I don't know about in the United States.
I want to ask you about OCD.
Yeah.
So it just seems so many people, have a certain way. I have to do this. I have to put my clothes in the closet this way. I have to. And that seems to be a spectrum disorder also. So how does
Correct.
one diagnose whether you just are kind of in the normal quote unquote range of just wanting things a certain way at times or with certain
Mhm.
things, and you having the disorder? How is that decision made?
That's a really great question. And I could do a whole talk just about OCD or ADHD, but essentially, it's the most important thing is how much it affects your daily life. If it interferes with your daily living, it is going to be a disorder. And that's not up to you to self-diagnose. A lot of people, I think, do that with things like ADHD and OCD and even maybe Tourette syndrome. I don't know. But people will say, "Oh, I'm so OCD," or "Oh,
Yeah,
it's
I
my
hear that all the
ADHD."
time. Right.
Yeah, and if they don't actually have the diagnosis, it's a little bit insulting to those that have the condition because it's minimizing the effects on their daily lives. If you like to have a neat closet, great. But if you spend 10 hours, well, I think they say in the diagnostic criteria, more than an hour a day, more than an hour a day redoing your closet every day, we
Whoa.
might be talking about having a disorder. If you just like it neat and you straighten it up once a week,
Mm.
I think that's pretty normal. And
So,
that's actually a good trait, right? That's not a
so
bad
I had
trait.
a friend who's, if his wife is the one who vacuumed the house, he had to re-vacuum it because he had this have the vacuum cleaner lines in a straight pattern through the whole house every time.
Okay, well, that's getting a little, that would be somebody I might say, check it out with a doctor. But it would also depend on if you only did it once, that's okay.
No, all the time. It's like,
No, no, I mean as in once every 2 weeks, right? But if he's
oh,
doing it every hour or,
oh.
redoing it over and over again, there's always where do you cross that line? And
Yeah, I
that's
don't.
where the professionals come in, right? The professionals need to make that decision and hopefully they know about it because that's the other issue that's a problem with all of these, whether it be Tourette syndrome, OCD, ADHD. If you're talking about these disorders, not every doctor is necessarily fluent or understanding what they are, particularly Tourette syndrome. And the Tourette OCD Alberta Network, when they started up, did a survey to find out what the medical professionals in Alberta, how many of them understood what the disorder was. And it was pretty abysmal. So I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but it wasn't good. And it took me about 7 years to get a diagnosis for my oldest, who had pretty severe tics. We saw specialists, like we were sent to specialists who just said, "Oh, he'll grow out of it. Don't worry about it. It's nothing. Just ignore them." That is still true to this day. So that's one of the things the Tourette OCD Alberta Network is really trying to change is to try and educate not only people in schools like I did, that was my role, but also the medical professionals. So it's really important that they get a correct diagnosis for obvious reasons.
Is
Uh,
this because diagnosis has changed over time and maybe older practitioners aren't up to speed, or is it just something that doesn't get uniformly taught?
Unless you're doing a specialty in the disorder, I'm not sure how much education. That's something I really don't know, but they don't get enough, obviously, for them. If you think about it, a general practitioner has to know so much, and I think that's hard. That's not an easy thing to do. So the only way to do that is to get the information out there. I just think there's just too much information, as well as, I'll get into the history of it a little later as to when it became a diagnosis, when it actually started. But when I finally figured out what was going on with my oldest son, I went to the doctor and said, it was an article actually in the Globe and Mail, a Canadian newspaper. I said, "I think this is what my son has. I think it's Tourette syndrome." And she says, "Oh, no, I don't think so. That's a very serious diagnosis because doctors are people too. They see the movies, they see what's out in the media, and they also get that skewed perception as to what it is. But to
Did
give
they ask you, did they say right out, oh, they're not cursing, so they don't have it?
They no, she never did say that. She just said it was a very serious disorder or diagnosis. And to give her credit, decided to send Graham to the Tourette clinic in our city, which we're very lucky to have a Tourette clinic at the time. Of course, it took about a year and a half to get in. And he came out with not just a diagnosis of Tourette syndrome, but the OCD, or the obsessive compulsive symptoms, sleep disorder, rage disorder. There's a whole list, sensory issues, whole list of things. And she was humbled. She was very glad that she had referred him, because that's when we started getting the help. People don't like labels. However, labels give us a means of communication. And my oldest son went from a behavior problem and the weird kid in the classroom to someone who has Tourette syndrome, and here's what we can do to help him. And it was a huge turning point. Yeah, it was really important, really, really important. So thanks for the question. It's a good one. So just as a quick overview, this is a short list really of the associated disorders. There's the ADHD, obsessive compulsive disorder. I talked a little bit about sensory phenomena, and that's being hypersensitive to smell, taste, clothing, textures, etc., food. Anxiety disorders, dysgraphia, which means that they have trouble writing. They will have learning disabilities and social function deficits. And this is from the book called Tourette Syndrome by David Martino, who happens to be on the board of the Tourette OCD Alberta Network, as well as one of the clinicians at the clinic here. And he partnered with James Leckman to write a wonderful book about Tourette syndrome, where I get most of my material regarding what it is and what the symptoms look like and treatments and things. And he made this wonderful chart, which really puts it together quite nicely. So the dotted lines at the beginning of each line are there's things happening intermittently. Then the solid line means that, it's a pretty regular thing, that things are happening on a regular basis. So if you look at this, the first thing that usually happens is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. There was a time when people thought the ADHD medication for kids was causing tics, because they would give them the medication and then the tics would develop. And you can see they would start a year and a half later. They've now since ruled that out, which is good, through experimentation, etc. So these are just people who are going to get Tourette syndrome often will get ADHD first. And then from the eyes, face, and head, it starts to move down the body to the neck and the shoulders, the arms, the trunk of the legs. And then there's the sensory phenomena that sort of kicks in. And then we get into the vocal tics. So they come later. This was not the case for my oldest, at least. My other two, yes. The sounds and noises started at age 4. And I think if I remember correctly, the actual movement tics were about age 3. He was very young, and it's unusual. And then lastly, the obsessive compulsive disorder does appear. That leads us into what age does Tourette syndrome typically manifest. You can see it's age 6 to 8, and I left those gaps because otherwise it would be, you could see by that chart that we just had, Rob, you could argue with me that it could be beyond 6 to 8. So that's one of the reasons I had the gaps. Now, we know that this is false, that they do not stay the same over time. They constantly are changing. It's actually what makes the disorder very difficult to deal with. You can imagine getting one tic, just getting used to it, and then another one comes along, or it changes. And they wax and wane over time and severity, and that is true.
So if someone happens to be someone, say one of the people who raps, meaning the singer or the opera, when we say change, do they just change to a different genre of that type of thing, or would it be a totally different kind of a tic?
Sure, both of those could be either. Yeah, I'll give you an example. There was a student I did an in-service for many years ago she had a common childhood tic, which is a spitting tic. It's horrific. Yeah, and sometimes they even spit at other people, which is not good. And so this girl had a spitting tic, and by the time I did the in-service for her, it had changed to the swearing tic. And the family, the teacher, the students, everybody was excited. So I think your frame of reference can really change when you have this disorder, because they thought swearing was so much better than spitting. And yeah.
So wait, do more benign tics often graduate to more aggressive tics, or do people just sort of do they vary in the types of tics they display over their lifetime?
Yeah, I think it's more of the second. I think it's more, they vary, and it depends on the circumstances. And I may as well answer that now. I will come up in a later slide that stress can make them worse. So you might have more severe tics if you're experiencing either good or bad stress. So whenever it was time for us to go on a holiday with our family, the tics and the OCD and all the other behaviors were much worse because they were excited about going on holiday. So it could be good stress or bad stress, like having a lot of homework assignments or work assignments or life events, maybe a grandparent dying, something like that will cause those tics to get worse. And then you will have periods, there were periods where the tics were almost non-existent and things were going along really well. And that's when there's sort of not as much anxiety happening and it's a very complex disorder.
Can there be a short-term change, like someone with the disorder goes to a horror film, which is very stressful, a well-done horror film? Would that cause them to have worse symptoms for a short time during or after the film?
It could, yes. It depends on, I guess, if they're really excited about the film and they love horror, sure. Or if it really scares them, sure. You see it's a problem either way.
So it's basically just a spike in anxiety or excitement that will bring it out usually.
Usually, yeah, or illness. Illness is another one, like I mentioned. It can make the symptoms worse. In fact, with my kids, this is just a personal anecdote, of course, their tics, their symptoms would get worse, and then the cold would happen like a day later. So I knew something was coming, and it may not have been school related. So any kind of stress like that, it could make the tics worse. And puberty, oh my goodness, yes, that's when things really went crazy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The movie theater question reminded me of a story where I told you Graham had this thing where he would go doidle. Well, he would go doidle and then he would squeak like a mouse, but it was really high pitched and loud. And he wanted to go see a movie. And I'm like, you can't go there because it will disrupt everybody. And so are you going to be able to hold it in? And yes, they can hold it in, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. But what happened as well is his facial tics and his leg tics went really crazy during that time. So trying to hold the tics in will usually make them worse.
Is laughing inappropriately one possible?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, the worst
Yeah.
circumstance I anecdotally ever saw was we were at a small theater, which we frequent with only maybe 40 seats. And this young guy was with his family in the first row, and there's people on stage, and he was laughing as people were it was like an Agatha Christie murder thing. And as people were being killed, he was laughing hysterically. I felt bad for the family as well as the actors who was like, are wondering what's going
Right.
on here.
Yeah. And people can be judgmental too and think that's rude, right? And I'm guessing that person did not want to be doing that and wanted to be enjoying the play. But at the same time, as a parent, was it a kid that was doing this or an adult?
It looked like they were young 20s, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, because there's that whole sort of accountability of like if the staff, like if he had approached the people who are acting and said, "Hey, this is going to happen. Is that okay? I'm here." I think that's great. They stayed, but
Yeah,
then
it's possible that happened. I didn't know
yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's where that education comes in. And then that issue becomes more like a cough. Like how many times when you're at a theater do people cough or sneeze, right? And nobody thinks anything of it. Well, maybe coughing is after COVID, everybody thinks about it, but that it becomes more of the background noise if you know it's a tic. The problem is if you don't know it's a tic, people make assumptions and judgments.
Right.
And that's one of the things that we try and tell people is you need to let people know in those situations that this may happen. And that may be hard for the person, right? So we have to have some understanding as well. But I do think that it would have been, if that was the case, it would have been appropriate to let the people on stage know that it could happen. Otherwise, I think you're right. It would feel really strange, as well as to let the audience know. But not everyone wants to disclose. They don't have to say who it is. They could just say somebody in the audience. Mind you, they're going to know, aren't they? They're going to know who it is as soon as they start shouting. So it's a balancing act, is what I'm trying to say.
Now, I'm wondering, like in the Joker movie, he has
Mhm.
this tic where he laughs at
Yeah.
inopportune moments. and he carries a card with him. Like he's on a city bus at one point, and he hands it to a lady and her little child, and she's like, "Okay, this doesn't help anything." But like, is that commonplace or?
It's one of the possible ways that people deal with having severe tics. Yes, I know of people who have printed cards that they will hand out to other people. I have not ever received one myself, but then again, I'm in the community. But I do know of people who do that. Yes, it is something that we do recommend as a possibility, especially if they're particularly offensive. And most tics, people won't even know are happening. They might hear somebody say a word and then go, "Oh, that was interesting," but not think anything more of it. So most of the time, it's not necessary, but there are cases where I do know of that have done that. Any other questions? We're good to go.
No, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so this one is the tics over time can, and this is about a ratio of a third of the population remain the same entering adulthood. So after puberty, when things get worse, they kind of go back to the pre-puberty time, and then they just stay the same. They get worse entering adulthood, and that was my friend Steve. That's about a third of the Tourette population, and then about a third decrease into adulthood. And sometimes the symptoms completely go away. So you can imagine too that people will try and say, well, change your diet, which good diet is good for everybody, or try this, homeopathic medication. And then they give it to their person, their kid, and then they go away. Well, it could be one, it's in a waxing and waning stage, or two, it could be the situation where they were going to get better anyway. So it feeds into some of the misinformation about how to cure Tourette syndrome, which it cannot be cured. So it is all of the above in this case. What percentage of people? It is 1%. So it's much higher than a lot of people think. It's 1 in 100. And so I've gone to schools, 600 people in the schools, and that's 6 kids in that school. And I try to get in and do talks. And I have done whole schools. I've done one talk for one class, and then they go, "You've got to come in and do it to every class," because it's really good to educate just against anti-bullying and understanding differences. And that's how we frame it. And what's also interesting is it's 3 times more likely in boys and girls. I have seen some literature that says 4 times more likely in boys and girls. I'm using the the Tourette book that Davida Martino has written for my statistics. And boys and girls do both have the same or similar symptomology, though there is some talk about girls maybe showing symptoms a little later, as well as maybe are more likely to develop obsessive compulsive like symptoms first. So there are maybe some differences. It's an ongoing thing. We're studying it and learning more all the time.
So I've learned from a friend who says she's autistic
Mm-hmm.
about the issue of the gender disparity in that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. And it's something that the community is definitely trying to keep in mind, and this has been something discussed for
So her perception there
while.
was that it had to do with diagnosis and not a real thing because men are expected to be aloof or whatever, and women are not, and therefore they learn to be more sociable, and therefore it's hidden better. I mean, something like that, as I recall from our conversation.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing any literature about that, more around the idea that it's more related to sort of eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorders, those types of things. And, where do you draw the line between what's a tic and what's an obsession? Sometimes it can be very difficult, and there are ways I could get into that, but that would be another discussion for sure. But it can get a little bit tricky because usually what happens with people with Tourette syndrome, but not always, is that for obsessive thoughts, it's like I have to flick a light switch 20 times or else my mother will die. And that's more on the OCD spectrum. Versus with Tourette syndrome, it might be I have to flick this 20 times until it feels right, which is very similar to what happens after a tic. It actually feels better.
It feels like OCD, Tourette's, whatever.
Mhm.
we're not really going to diagnose these unless it becomes an issue where
Yeah.
medical intervention is necessary.
Yeah.
Like I make noises, I sing gibberish, I repeat myself a lot just to annoy people and just to hear myself sometimes. But I'm functioning. I don't have an issue, so
No, it
yeah,
doesn't. The key is, does it impact your daily living?
there
And
you
to
go.
what extent does it impact your daily living? If it's 5 minutes here and there, once a week, who cares? You know what I'm saying? But when it's becomes to the point where you can't go to school. My youngest spent 6 months not able to set foot into a classroom because
Oh,
of
wow.
severe anxiety. Oh, and that's not the tics that cause that. That's the anxiety and the obsessive compulsiveness, and it's complicated, right? My oldest, he had rage disorder, so he'd look at a test even though he knew every question how to answer it. If he didn't write down the perfect answer, he would tear it up and storm out of the classroom. And that's impacting daily life. I hope that makes sense. I mean, I know that's pretty severe. And again, it's on a spectrum and it can creep up. So a lot of this stuff, especially obsessive compulsive disorder, is quite hidden and it creeps up and it starts off to be quite minimal, but can grow and grow and grow until it is debilitating. And that's usually when it's discovered. And quite often it's adulthood when it's discovered. So for this one, people who say they are seeking attention, oh my goodness, I'm so glad everybody said false in the quiz, because this one I have heard so many times and it's discouraging when you keep hearing this, and it is false. And that leads me to this. It's not learned behavior, though tics can be learned, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. It's not a result of bad parenting. I was the bad parent many times in the grocery store as my kids were having fits. And it is not curable, it's not an intentional choice, and it is also not the only tic disorder. Roughly about 20% of kids, when they're growing up, will develop a tic. And then it goes away. And that's why the diagnostic criteria is the way it is, where you have to wait a year and you have to have multiple types of tics for it to be Tourette syndrome. The other possibilities, they develop a tic. I mean, there's more than one other possibility. There's lots of them. One other possibility is they get one tic, they grow up and they have that tic for life, but it's not Tourette syndrome, it's something else. So I just want to read a little bit of this because I've given you some sort of an overview of what they look like, but this is sort of the more, I guess, scientific definition. They are a voluntary capitulation to an irresistible urge. Those are big words. And what that means is they're semi-voluntary because they are not strictly involuntary. And these are Dr. Tamara Pringsheim's words, to be honest, because she just has a great way of speaking and presenting this. So they may be experienced as a voluntary response to the unwanted premonitory urge. A unique aspect of tics relative to other movement disorders is that they are suppressible yet irresistible. They are experienced as an irresistible urge that must eventually be expressed. And it is not easy to resist this urge, especially for young children. Often there's no reason to resist, and the tic becomes semi-automatic, like scratching an itch. The itchy feeling is not voluntary, but the decision to scratch is. While those with Tourette syndrome can suppress the tics, it can come at a tremendous cost, like we talked about before. Imagine yourself at work with an arm covered in itchy mosquito bites, and you're told you're not going to get paid if you scratch. While it is possible for you to refrain from scratching, most likely you will be thinking more about not scratching than doing your work. So I hope that's a good analogy to understand kind of how it feels to have a tic. I have some tics, very mild ones that I don't even know I'm doing. In fact, I didn't know I had a bit of an eye blinking tic for a while. I don't know if I still have it because I don't know I'm doing it. I saw myself on camera on a recording and was like, oh, that's interesting. So it's obviously in the family, but mine is extremely mild and does not interfere. And remember, they constantly change how they sound and appear, and they're often repetitive. Like my friend who did ba 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 ba, and he sang a song for 2 days or 3 days, or Graham saying what's for dinner tonight. I think it was about 2 years he did that. And they manifest differently from one person to another. My kids were completely different from each other. Students that I have helped in the classroom or have met at conferences, everyone is really different. Every individual is unique. Of course, they wax and wane, and the frequency, complexity, and severity tends to change, and they change between people too. So some people may have mild symptoms, others may have very severe symptoms. And we call the actions motor tics, and we call sounds and speech. So it can be a cough or a sniff. Anything that makes a noise, we call a vocal tic, just for clarification. And we talked about this already, so I won't spend a lot of time. These are all things that can make symptoms worse. Now, just think my oldest son had sleep challenges, so fatigue makes the tics worse, but then they can't sleep, and it's this vicious cycle that can happen. And the other thing that we didn't really talk about is that seeing or hearing someone ticking can also cause them to tick. My friend Steve went to a conference, and there was somebody saying monkey over and over again. That was their tick. And it made him want to start saying monkey. Think about if you're in a room full of people and one person yawns. All of us have that urge to kind of mimic, but with Tourette syndrome, it's just that much worse.
Yeah, what is
And
it with
also-
the yawn? I've actually seen studies that show animals do that also.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know why we would do that. It's not something that I've really looked into, but it's an interesting question. Same with talking about ticks, just sort of planting that idea. I used to say to my kids, "Oh, you know that tick you hated? You haven't done it for a while." And they'd say, "Mom, be quiet because you're making me want to do it again." So talking about them seeing or hearing ticks can make things worse.
By the way, I just yawned twice. You made me do it. Just saying it, not even seeing a yawn.
Not
just
even seeing
saying
it. Exactly. It's that sort of that power of suggestion with our brains, right? So what can help? Obviously, exercise helps everybody. That's just sort of common sense. Sleep helps everybody, common sense. But what's really interesting is that activities that require focused attention can really help. For example, my oldest son loves playing classical guitar. He did until he became a father. Now he's being a father instead of playing guitar. But he would play for hours and not a tick would happen. Focused attention, you can go for long periods of time. And what's interesting too, some of the videos I've been watching lately when preparation for this, people would say you're faking your tics because look, you just read a poem and you didn't tick once. Well, if that's something they love to do and there's required focus, it's not unusual for people to not tick. So that is not a reasonable reason to say someone is faking. Hopefully people don't fake tics and Tourette syndrome. So periodic suppression is possible. I did talk about that, like my son at the theater, but it does take intense effort, diverse attention, and again, is difficult for young children. So as adults, they can get better at it, but it can, depending on the circumstances, be very difficult. So now here's your part, Rob, back in time. We're going to go into history. Before its formal identification, which actually happened in the 19th century. We'll talk about that as well. The symptoms associated with Tourette syndrome were often attributed to witchcraft or demonic possession. And it's not just Tourette syndrome, though. It's other neurological and psychological issues such as epilepsy, schizophrenia, etc. So it's not just people with Tourette syndrome. So let's get into this a little bit. In a text that I found called The Witch's Hammer or The Hammer of the Witches, I don't know, I've found writings about both of those names. It's written by the same two monks. They're two Dominican monks who wrote this. And in that document, they state that in 1486, there were two cases that now, when we look back, we could say maybe it was Tourette syndrome. And there was a woman who was said to be possessed by demons because she constantly cursed during Catholic Mass, particularly at the moment the priest gave his final blessing. And the second case was the priest, and he would swear compulsively while praying to the Virgin Mary. And I think it's interesting that both of these are cursings and they're not other kind of tics that could possibly happen because, of course, this would draw attention to them. So I'm guessing that there's more people. Now, what happened to these people? Well, I don't think you're surprised to find out that the woman was burned at the stake and the priest was saved by an exorcism.
Oh, what a surprise.
Yeah, I didn't think you'd be surprised by that one. It's horrible. And there's a really good video we're going to watch in a little bit that kind of talks a little bit about this, and I think it's quite well done. She says it probably better than I do. So what are the origins? Well, let's jump up to the 1800s, and Tourette syndrome is actually named after the French physician Gilles de la Tourette. And he wrote a paper in 1885 that described 9 patients that he described as having convulsive tic disorders. And just remember that not much was known about the brain at the time. And there's a bit of a warning coming up because some of the things that I'm going to talk about might be a little disturbing to some people. And just remember again that these same treatments were often used or discussed regarding other neurological and mental disorders. Again, epilepsy, schizophrenia, even migraine. I have migraine headaches and depression, etc. So the first one I'm going to talk about, we're going to jump up to the 1890s, and he read Gilles de Tourette's work, and he found that he had a patient who had tics resembling the cases that were in Tourette's paper. And the cases were not alleviated by pharmacotherapy. Now, I don't know what the pharmacotherapy, I couldn't find out what that was at the time. I'd be very interested to know, but apparently it failed. And the patient was a 15-year-old boy, and of course he had tics. And he decided that the tics were caused by masturbation. So guess what the treatment was? Circumcision and splinting the boy's arms
Yikes.
behind his back at
Oh my
night.
gosh.
Yeah. And so this is pre-Freud. And then we're going to get into the Freudian psychoanalysis. And this is Sandor Ferenczi. And in 1921, he declared that coprolalia, that's the swearing tic, was a result of repressed sexual emotions, which is very Freudian, right? And he was a follower. I call him a Freudian friend and fellow psychoanalyst. And he came up with this idea. And then it keeps on going in 1943. And I found Margaret Mahler, and she was a student of Ferenczi's, by the way. She claimed that tics were not only a result of, again, repressed concerns about sexuality, but added fear of erections, unresolved family conflicts, especially those involving domineering mothers. So there's that Freud again. So I guess if we get rid of domineering mothers, we don't have tics. And I wonder how she defined a domineering mother. But in the 1960s, this continued. So this Freudian psychoanalysis was quite popular all the way through to the 60s and still exists to some extent now, which that's, to me, very sad. And there was a paper published by Lee and Park in 2019, and they found that tics were still happening, or that they found that tics were still considered to be a result of family issues that included alcoholism and ineffective parenting. So that's why I have that slide that says it is not a result of bad parenting. And, you know, it's so sad when those beliefs are still part of our society. So, demons today, does it still happen? It's really interesting because I have to say, in all the years I've been doing this since 2005, nobody has ever asked me the question, do people believe that the tics are as a result of demons? And I have done talks to schools, Catholic schools, Jewish schools, all different denominations. I've really gone to different communities, and it has never come up. Maybe they were just being polite, but I don't think so. I didn't get that sense. And I asked Dr. Tamara Pringsheim if she had ever come across that in all the years she has been in her practice, and she said no, she's never had it. However, just recently, because of the work being done at the Tourette OCD Alberta network, she was in contact with somebody from Turkey, and that is apparently, or can be, an issue with people in Turkey. So I think it's quite cultural. So the first time that I was ever asked if it could be demons, and it wasn't somebody who believed it was demons, it was more of a question, do people think that it's demons?
Hey, you're telling me Canny Biddle doesn't believe in demons. Are you breaking news here?
But that was the first time. It was 2 years ago. That question was asked, and ever since then, I've kind of been reading about it, trying to learn a little bit about it, and look at the history. And actually, Tamara Pringsheim is doing sort of a look into the history of Tourette syndrome right now, and she's going to let me know the results when they come. And I'm excited to learn about them. So that was the first time anybody had even mentioned it, and it had not even entered my frame of reference until that
I
time.
think I recall watching that episode, and I was surprised you hadn't heard that. Yeah. So, by the way, if you
Yeah.
want to look at Kenny did an episode of RfRx, and he talked about his former ghost hunting career and his
Hmm.
hop over to the other side of the fence.
Yeah, it's a really good story. I think I've seen that episode actually. All right, so for demons today, let's take a look. So in 2005, a paper by Grace and Russell, they documented teacher in an Australian Christian school stating a student's tics were the result of demonic possession. In 2009, it was documented that an exorcism was performed on someone with Tourette syndrome in the state of Indiana. And in 2017, in Bali, tics are seen as signs that a person is possessed by evil spirits, and ritualistic rites on one woman were performed to appease those spirits, and they included drinking her own urine. And there were other things too, but that was the one that really kind of freaked me out a little bit.
Ross Blotcher just did that for, an investigation. So,
Yeah, it is a thing. I mean, I think Tim Caulfield up here in Alberta, he did a Canadian manosphere episode not that long ago, a few months ago. And one of the things in this manosphere was drinking urine. So it seems to be
yeah,
a thing
yeah,
for all different reasons. I don't get
yeah,
it, but
yeah. Make you more masculine or get rid of demons or both.
yeah,
Um,
it works for everything.
yeah.
It's a cure-all, I guess. I don't know. All right, so I want you to meet Carly. She was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome at age 12. And this is actually, to me, really disturbing because, well, first of all, she demonstrates a lot of different tics. So you're going to actually see them in action. You can see how they kind of interrupt her normal flow of conversation. You can tell it's a tic versus, an insult kind of thing. So I think it's good. Right here in this video, I feel her tics are fairly severe, and they could be exacerbated because she's nervous when she films these. She's done a lot of these films, so maybe it's not nerves. It could also just be association, like I said before, like my son saying, "What's for dinner tonight?" when he sees me. So it could be association. I hope she doesn't tic like this all the time. There are some cases like that. Most people do get big breaks, especially, as I say, when they're concentrating on something they love to do. So let's listen to her. I want you to really watch how she does this. And remember as well that a lot of these comments, we don't know where they're coming from. It might be coming from places like Turkey where this is a thing. It could be just trolls who are just being mean. We really don't know where these people are coming from, but the bottom line is no matter where they are, this is harmful and hurtful. And so hopefully this works. Let me know if the sound doesn't work. Go.
It could be demons tormenting too. Respectfully, huh? For those of you guys new here and have no idea what this comment is referring to, my name is Carly and I have Tourette syndrome. And this lovely commenter says that my Tourette's or my tics could just be demons tormenting me. It's absolutely insane. I got rice. How many people will comment on my videos in some sort of religious tone, saying that I'm possessed, that I need to go to church more, that if I just pray, my tics will go away. And it's really not, I got rice, I have a tooth, and it's really not a nice thing to hear. Je t'aime. As someone who has grown up Catholic, like, I believe in God, I've been to church, like, I know my God. And growing up, I always felt so terrible about the tics I was having, especially the tics that were being rude to the church or the tics that were just overall bad and inappropriate. Like, growing up and not being in control of those and not knowing why I was doing these things was really, really detrimental to my mental health. And the fact that people are commenting saying I'm possessed, not a good look. Obviously, this possession je t'aime take on Tourette's has been disproven years ago. We now know that in the 18th and 19th centuries, Christianity was used in medicine, basically, to say, like, oh, if this is wrong with you, it's just the devil. Like, God can heal you. People who had Tourette's or tics in the past were often treated as witches and were trialed for witchcraft, or they were given exorcisms and later on given lobotomies. Like, they were treated like they were actually insane. But this is all due to Christianity and how different medical professionals and practitioners just believed in the church for diagnosing things. And this is so outdated. And it's so harmful to people with Tourette's to hear that they're possessed or that their disorder can just be cured by going to church. I make videos talking about this the odd time, honestly not very much, but anytime I do, I will get so many comments of people saying, you don't hear that often, like it can't be said that much. I hear this all the time. People with Tourette's are not possessed, okay? It's a neurological disorder. My brain is different than yours.
Oh, she's awesome.
Isn't she amazing? And how well spoken, right? She's really well spoken. I love the French. I just absolutely love that she has a French tic. And she says, I love you in French, and then gives you the finger at the same time. So
Oh, I was wondering what she was saying. Okay.
yes, je t'aime is I love you. So I think it's kind of I think it's a fun tic to have together, but then I have kind of an interesting sense of humor. But I think she's lovely. I really, really liked this video when I found her channel. So do check her out, and you might learn something from her. I've watched a few of hers, and what I've watched, I really enjoy. And she hasn't said anything really crazy. So I hope that gives you an idea of what, especially the word, the full sentences she was saying, how that can flow within a sentence and how it doesn't make any contextual sense. And that's how you can tell it is a tic.
I think it's important for young people to have role models that are this aggressive and have that kind of moxie to look up to, because
Yes.
Decorum and politeness, yeah, that's valuable too, but
Yeah.
right here,
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, I had, growing up, probably a little bit of an obsession about not swearing. And I didn't like being around people who swore. And then I had kids with Tourette syndrome. Now, as I say, they never swore, they never developed the swearing tic. Do they swear? Of course they do, but like normal teenagers and adults. And then I'm going to a Tourette conference and people are randomly swearing, because in a group of 300 people, you're probably going to have one or two who have the swearing tic, and or more. And I couldn't be offended by that, because then I'm going to be offended by the people that are there. And it's really not their intention. They're not doing this on purpose. So it was a really good learning experience for me, who used to be judgmental about people who swore. So it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. So I just want to, before I get to the empathy exercise, the very last thing I want to do, this is Dr. Oliver Sacks. I'm a huge fan of his work. And if you haven't heard of him before, he writes very interesting books about neurology. And this one in particular is a really good starter if you wanted to get into his work. And it's called The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And he talks about interesting cases that he has seen as a neurologist over the years. And in 1971, he had his very first Tourette patient. And he said that it had an incidence, I had read, of 1 in a million. Yet I had apparently seen 3 examples in an hour. And then when he went out into the streets of New York, he observed 5 people in 2 days with apparent tics. So his thoughts were, I'm thinking that that incidence is not correct. And I get asked a lot, why has the incidence of Tourette syndrome increased so much over the last, 50 years? And my answer is because we know how to diagnose it. And we can recognize it now. And it might even be higher than 1%. We don't really know, because we don't know if it's being diagnosed as much as it could be. It might be 1%, or it might be somewhere around there. So it's not necessarily more people with Tourette syndrome. It's just now more recognized. Very similar to the autistic spectrum disorder. Similar idea. So let's get your pen and paper ready. We're going to do an empathy exercise. So I'm going to be a teacher. I'm going to go back to my role as a teacher. And you are going to do a task for me. And that task is a writing assignment. In a few minutes, not now, I'm going to put up a poem. And you are going to copy down the poem. So it's going to be a fairly simple task. You don't have to do much thinking other than copying. And I'm going to give you a tick. And there's going to be 3 rounds to this. You're going to get 3 chances to try this. And my first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to give you a tick. And when I did this with my friend Steve, he would always give one of his ticks. So I'm going to give you a real tick. And what you're going to do is when I clap, your brain is going to say you need to do this. And you're going to take your writing hand and you're going to punch it up in the air and you're going to do it sharply. Now, don't injure yourself. So do it as sharply as you feel safe to do. If he was in the room watching everybody, he would go around and say, okay, that's not hard enough. Because when he ticked hard. And so when I clap, you're going to punch your writing hand in the air. You're going to have 30 seconds to write. And I'm going to show you the poem now, but don't start yet. So here's the poem. It's by Lewis Carroll. It's The Walrus and the Carpenter. And I'm going to give you 30 seconds. I want you to write as quickly and as neatly as you can while having Tourette syndrome. Are there any questions before I start? Are we good, Rob?
Go for it.
Awesome. Okay, on your mark, get set, go. Clap. 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 10 seconds. Clap. 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 Time.
Oh, man.
I didn't even make it out of the first stanza, bro.
No, me neither.
Yes. So you had quite a difference, didn't you? A lot less.
Yeah.
So count up your words that you got with that one and circle the answer. Draw a line because we're going to do it again. You may have noticed it. Anybody, I wouldn't mind if everybody who's listening, if you in the chat, put little comments about what you were feeling. Did you notice anything about, say, anxiety or anticipation?
I was annoyed at you. I was very annoyed. Stop it. Just stop it.
Just wait. You're going to get real mad at me. So remember how we have, before I go on, how I choose how often to do the ticks is actually based on a little research project that my son did in high school. Now I take this as a grain of salt because, as you know, ticks are varied, etc. And maybe he ticked more frequently during this time, or maybe he didn't. I don't really know, but he was a little obsessive and he decided to do a spreadsheet and randomly pick times during the day for a week or 2 where he timed how often he ticked. And this could be just a really minor tick or a really big tick. And he ticked every 3 seconds. I ticked and I waited for every 10 seconds, or not 10, 5 seconds. So I actually gave you a little break compared to what he says
Oh,
he
my.
experienced. And the other thing is, you notice how when I said 10 seconds, time limit happening, the ticks became more frequent. And that's to try and imitate the anxiety that would actually happen when a time limit is announced in a classroom or at work or in any kind of situation where you
You
have
have to
some
take
kind of
a time-limited test. Like you have to finish this test in a certain amount of time.
Yeah, or you might be at work and say, I need this in an hour, right? It's probably if they don't think it's going to be possible, the anxiety will increase. If they think, oh yeah, no problem, it still may increase for a bit, but it's still going to cause the symptoms to probably increase for a little while, but as they get into it, maybe they will go back down with that intense concentration. So you never know exactly how. As they get older too, they learn how to deal with it a lot better. Okay, so let's do the second part. So the second part, I'm going to now give you one of the comorbid or coexisting disorders, and I'm going to start with OCD. And this isn't really realistic, maybe, but it gives you an idea of what it is like to have obsessive compulsive disorder. It's similar to Susan O'Connor, who was a presenter for, or maybe still is, a presenter for Tourette Association in the US. She had a thing when she was a kid where after every third word, she had to count to 20. Well, I'm not going to make you do that. That's too complicated. We'll keep it simple. So after every third word, so the time has, that's your third word, has, you're going to cross it out exactly 3 times because it doesn't look quite right. And then you're going to rewrite it, HAS. And then you're going to go come the walrus. Okay, that's the next third word. Cross it out 3 times and then rewrite it. And if I say clap, you're going to tick and punch the air with your writing hand.
Ugh.
Any questions? I like the giggle.
Fucking go.
All right, I just need to start this again. And for some reason, it went to 10 minutes. Okay, on your mark, get set, go. Clap. 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 10 seconds. Clap, clap. Clap, clap. Clap. Time.
Oh my God.
Awesome.
Did you get more words or less?
A lot less.
A lot less. Yeah, that's usual.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I went from 18 to 11.
Yes. So most people will go down at this point. Now, the last thing we're going to add is ADHD, because that's the top 3, right? Tourette syndrome, OCD, ADHD. And what's interesting about this one is sometimes I add this in and people do better. I find that really interesting. So we'll see what happens here if anybody does that. I'd love to know. Doesn't happen very often, but it does. It has happened several times over my career of doing this. So what's going to happen for ADHD is I'm going to go bzzz like a bee, because one of the things that people think about ADHD is you can't pay attention to anything, but actually it's a hyper focus on things and you switch attention very easily. So you're going to be really hyper focused on your empathy exercise, doing the time has, cross out 3 times, rewrite it, tick, because I say clap, and then you're going to hear bzzz and you're going to look up. So anytime I say bzzz, look up to see where that bee is because you're worried it's going to sting you. Any questions? On your mark, get set, go. Clap. Bzzz. Clap. Bzzz. Clap. Clap. 10 seconds. Bzzz. Clap, clap. Bzzz. Clap, clap. Clap. Time.
Made it to
How'd
8,
you do?
8 words. That was as good as last time, sadly.
Yeah, I
Well
got about the
done.
same as last time.
Well done. That's amazing that that you could get around the same, because most people quite often will just give up. They can't even function. And so somebody, and this happened to my kids frequently during school, especially junior high, elementary school, not as much in high school, they would shut down because they just felt overwhelmed. And I think you can see how they could feel that way. And so I'll be really interested to see what people have to say in the chat. But that this essentially is the end of my talk. And this is where you can find me. And I like this joke. I don't know why. It's just silly. I have CDO. It's like OCD, but the letters are in alphabetical order like they should be.
I like it.
So that's my presentation. I hope you learned something. And if you ever want to learn more, there's lots of resources out there that are very good. Make sure you go to good resources. Don't trust the TikTok and YouTube necessarily. Go to the Tourette OCD Alberta Network website, etc.
Thank you. I am going to, yes, be very curious about the TikTok thing. We'll have to talk about that later. But okay, first we have questions that we've collected, and quite a few interesting ones. So yes, thank you very much again, Adrienne. That was
Thank
wonderful.
you.
I have seen some of your other talks on the subject, but nothing that went this deep.
Yeah, this is a deep dive into Tourette syndrome for sure. I'm sorry we had that interruption.
Yeah, well, things happen, not your fault. All right, Daniel, you want to pick one out?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of really good ones here too.
Yeah.
This one I was wondering too. Why is swearing so commonly seen as part of Tourette's when it's not that common of a thing?
I think essentially because if you look at sort of TikTok or YouTube, it's because of clickbait, right? People want to see the sort of most extreme cases. And in the case of someone like Oprah Winfrey, et cetera, in the past, I think it's the same thing. They want to get viewers. And it's a sensational version of it. And if you just had me come up with my occasional eye tics and they're
It's
not
not
going
as
to be too
hilarious, right?
yeah, right. So and that's unfortunate, but I don't know why they can't do both. They could have somebody, they could have two people come up, right, to educate. That's what I don't get. They're about sensationalizing things instead of educating and helping people.
I think the last like character in anything that I've seen with Tourette's was someone on Curb Your Enthusiasm who I think it was at like a funeral. He's just
Mhm.
cursing.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
Larry David got revenge on someone by bringing him in,
I remember that.
like,
Yep, yep. I remember that episode. I actually laughed.
it's
Because
funny.
sometimes, right, it is funny. Where I don't like it as much is where comedians or other people in general, if they swear because, they stub their toe, oh, I must have Tourette.
Well, that's the frustrating thing with
Yeah,
representation, right? Like, it's all
yeah.
well and good to laugh at the gay character or the Tourette's character, but when that's all that's ever being made, what's the
Hmm.
point? That's
Hmm.
your normies in the Midwest are going to see.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree. Good question.
Cool. Rob, you want to pick another one or should I?
Yeah, I can do that. I actually was curious about this. The hereditary factor.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So how much is it hereditary?
And that's something they're still looking into. The general feeling is, yes, it's hereditary. I was told many years ago by a psychologist who had Tourette syndrome, OCD, you name it, here in Canada, that I went to a workshop that he did, which was amazing. And he said, okay, you guys, this is a dominant recessive gene, so stop blaming your spouse. And
Yeah.
I
Okay.
thought that was a good way to actually approach it. Of course, I'm not a doctor. I don't get into the biology of it very much, but yes, that is what I teach. It is mostly genetic. Of course, environment influences it. I talked about that. Environment, if you're in a bad environment, it could really exacerbate the symptoms for sure. But there was a time for a while that they were thinking it might have also an organic root with, I think it was strep that it was. I may be not remembering. It's been a few years since I've read anything about this because it kind of ended up not. They looked into it as being a possibility and they said no, probably not. So it's been a long time since I've actually looked into that. It was called pandas, I believe. And I don't remember what that stands for, but there was a time where they were really looking into that sort of maybe a virus or something like that could cause it, but I think they're pretty sure.
Is there anything out there that I don't even want to mention this guy's name, but I will. Wakefield started the whole autism connection with vaccines. Did that ever connect with Tourette's?
I'm surprised it hasn't, but as far as I know, it has not.
Hmm.
And I hope it stays that way because
Yeah.
that would be just not right. And again, on so many levels. But
Yeah.
I haven't seen that personally. I'm not going to say it doesn't exist. Nothing would surprise me, but I certainly have not seen that.
Okay.
Yeah, someone in
Daniel?
the chat is like, don't give JFK Jr. any ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
Ooh.
I know. Yeah. I'm sure he'll watch
Yes, and
some of
Clay's
those.
put a thing about pandas because I was trying to pull it out of my brain, made up thing, and still many people believe they cause, yeah, and I've heard that. I've had the question occasionally, yeah. It's a bit like chronic Lyme of pediatrics. Thank you, Clay, for clarifying
Oh
that.
yes, we had Andrea Love talk about that on a former RfRx actually.
Yeah, yeah.
She's the head of the American Lyme Disease Institute, I think. All right, pick one, Daniel.
You got it. Yeah, I'm wondering about what is the overlap between self-soothing behaviors associated with trauma coping mechanisms and tics?
Oh my goodness. Can you repeat that? Because I need to absorb it. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I was like in my head, like wondering, like, wow, how would I even answer this? So, what is the
Yeah.
overlap between self-soothing behaviors, I guess like stimming, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Associated with trauma coping mechanisms and tics.
Well, just the sense that you get relief from a tick after you do it, I'm guessing that there would be some sense of soothing yourself by doing the ticks. The overlap, the whole overlap between, say, stimming, etc., I really don't know the answer to that question. It's not a question I've ever been asked, and it's an excellent question in all the years I've been doing this. So great. But that's the only thing I can sort of think of off the top of my head, is that there is a relief after doing a tick. And so sure, I guess doing the ticks could make a person feel better depending on the tick. But if it's a violent tick, there's a lot of people who have very violent head ticks and their necks get very sore. And that's not going to be a good tick to self-soothe with. And I don't think, I have the feeling that relief after the fact and the pain, I don't know. So that's a really interesting question.
Okay, no problem.
It's
All
a
right, I think we have
great
time for
question.
two more. All right. Should the symptoms of Tourette's completely go away, could they ever come back?
I've never heard of it, but other than the fact that if it was only they were gone for, say, a month or two and then they come back, because that happened with my kids, right? So that's a normal waxing and waning. But if they go away into adulthood and they've been without them for 10 or 20 years, I've never heard of them coming back. I guess it's possible, especially if but then it would be a different diagnosis. I was going to say if other things happen, something like Parkinson's or something like that, but that's a new diagnosis, so it has nothing to do with Tourette syndrome.
Okay.
Okay, I hope I answered that.
So Daniel asked the last one.
Yeah, I'm wondering, are there any known neurological similarities between Tourette syndrome, the autism spectrum, and dyslexia?
Dyslexia. Well, there's one I don't know a lot about.
Okay.
So I've never been asked that one either. I have been asked quite a bit about the similarities between autism spectrum disorder and Tourette syndrome. What's interesting is you can get a diagnosis of both. That's not that uncommon. Actually, the kid who did the rapping in my classroom had a dual diagnosis. And the way it was explained to me, and Clay can he can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way it was explained to me by my kid's psychiatrist is that if you look at the symptoms of Tourette syndrome, OCD is common with Tourette syndrome, that obsessive behavior is common with autism spectrum disorder. You can keep ticking all the way down. They can have ADHD together. There's a lot of similarities and overlap between the two. And he said that the biggest difference between the two diagnoses is that someone with autism spectrum disorder has difficulty recognizing social cues. Someone with Tourette syndrome, especially when they have the plus attached, where we've got OCD and ADHD and other things happening, they will miss social cues because they're ticking or obsessing, or they have ADHD and they're looking for the bee flying around the room. So they will miss social cues, but when they see them, they understand them. I hope that makes sense. That's about, the quickest answer I can give in a very complex question.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, again, thanks so much for giving your time today. Very fascinating.